I was 18 at the time, and it was the beginning of summer, so I was off from school and didn't have a job. The majority of my time was spent inside the house playing video games, watching YouTube or TV, or just relaxing. When this happened, my parents were out of town for a few days, leaving me with the house. This was a common thing, it was never a big deal. Sometimes, I'd invite friends over or whatever, but this night, I was just enjoying the time to myself. I was watching a rerun of one of my favorite TV shows on Netflix, while also scrolling through my phone. It was late. I don't know the exact time, but I think maybe 11 or 12, when there was a knock at the front door. I paused the TV and went to see who it was. It almost didn't even register in my mind that it was so late, but thankfully it did before I carelessly opened the door. I looked through the peephole and saw two men, both wearing similar clothes, just waiting for me to answer. I stood there and thought for a second about whether or not to let them know I was home by asking what they wanted. I ended up staying quiet, just watching, hoping they would leave. A few seconds later, they called out, "Hello? We're here looking to speak to Mr. and Mrs. Ian." They were referring to my parents, though I changed the name for privacy. Confused, I still remained quiet, knowing it was far too late for any sort of visit, even if it was important. After a minute, the men looked at each other and said something quietly, then walked off the porch. The outdoor lights were off, so I couldn't see where they went, but I never saw any headlights or cars show up, which had me wondering if they'd walked here. This only made things weirder. I went back to the TV, but left it on pause for a while, so I could hear if they came back. It only took a few minutes until I heard a pair of footsteps outside the house. They went up to the porch, but instead of knocking like they did before, they started making their way around to the side of the house. I got up and ran to the back window. As they got to the backyard, I saw them open the fence and enter. I hid away from the window so I wouldn't be seen, but I could hear them go up to the back door. They started talking, then began messing with the door. I took this as my chance to get my phone and hide inside the garage. I called the police, explaining the possible break-in that was taking place. After less than a minute, a loud pop sound vibrated through the house, and the back door slid open. Their footsteps went through the house and straight to the stairs, going up to the bedrooms. A door opened. They entered, and then closed it behind them. After that, there were no more sounds. I waited for a horrifyingly and slow 10 minutes in silence before the police pulled up to the house. When they did, there were a few quick footsteps upstairs, and then the two men started arguing. A few officers came in through the back door and ran upstairs, while another came to the garage and helped me outside. The men didn't resist arrest, but they also didn't speak a word on why they were there. Despite weeks going by, and it being somewhat obvious that they weren't simply robbing the house, the only thing the police could charge them with was breaking and entering. What scares me the most is that they seemed to be looking for my parents. It almost felt like they were going to wait upstairs for them until they came back from their trip. I think back to whether or not I should have shown myself, and if that would have stopped the break-in, but something about their behavior tells me that they still would have broken in, and would have done to me whatever was necessary.
If you hit that like button, there's a good chance someone else's spine will get tingled by these stories.
I'm 32 and live alone in a rural house. I have a few neighbors half a mile down that I talk to sometimes, but I mostly keep to myself and only go into town when I need to. I'm half retired, so I spend most of my time at home, but a few months out of the year I do some contracting work. At the time, it was late fall, and on this day, I was getting all of my equipment from out in the yard and storing it in the shed to prepare for the winter season. It was just a bunch of tools, lawnmowers, and stuff like that I'd left out. Anyway, while I was outside, I saw something unusual. A man was walking along the road that connected to my driveway. He had nothing on him, no backpack or camping gear. For context, this road he was on was entirely empty aside from the few houses like mine, and the town was a 4-hour walk away. I watched him until he disappeared far off down the road. After he was gone, I looked in both directions and saw no cars on the side of the road. It was really odd, but after a while, I stopped thinking about it and finished up with my yard. I was back inside before dark and made dinner while I cooled off. As I sat there, a sudden thud from outside startled me up from the table. It was a wooden thump, like it had come from where the shed is. I looked through the window out into the yard, and the door to the shed was wide open. It was old, but the door had never unlatched like that on its own before. Still unsure of exactly what was going on, I knew I had to check on it and close the door at the very least. I got my rifle just in case, but I was confident it wasn't going to be anything dangerous. Walking out to the shed, I listened carefully and heard nothing other than the quietness of the night. I looked around the field as well and saw no signs of wildlife or people. When I got to the open shed door, I turned on my flashlight and shined it inside. Nothing looked out of place. I stepped in and did a more thorough search for any animals hiding, but still, there wasn't anything. I closed the door to the shed and made sure it was secure, and then started walking back. As I made my way through the field toward my house, an eerie feeling grew inside of me. I didn't know what it was, but it continued to grow as I reached to the front door. I stepped in and locked the door behind me. As I walked into the hallway, I saw a shoe print right on the floor. I flicked on the light, and going across the hallway was a fine line of dirt shoe prints leading up to the spare bedroom. My heart started beating faster as I held my rifle up and took a deep breath, then carefully walked up to the door. I leaned my head against the wood and listened, hearing what sounded like someone breathing right on the other side. Before I could even think about what to do next, the handle twisted from my grip and the door swung open. I jumped back and held the rifle up. As a man who looked like he was about to charge me stood in the doorway holding a huge metal shovel up. I think my gun stopped him in his tracks, though. He stood in the doorway holding the shovel like a weapon, with a face full of rage. I yelled as loud as I could for him to stay back, trying to sound intimidating, but I was undoubtedly terrified. The man kept his distance, but his face full of anger never faded. At this moment, I didn't know what to do. Cops wouldn't be able to make it here for probably an hour if I called, and I definitely didn't want to hold him at gunpoint for that long, risking anything to happen. As we stood in a strained silence, the man suddenly threw the shovel in my direction, then sprinted back into the room. I ran in to see what he was doing and watched him start crawling out of the window. Part of me wanted to stop him, but another part of me couldn't bring myself to. He jumped out and ran off into the field, escaping into the vast empty night. To this day, that man has never been identified, and his intentions remain unknown. All I can say is that if I hadn't had my rifle in my hands, or if he had gotten the jump on me, I likely wouldn't be here today. 3 years ago, I was staying in a rental house while vacationing to see my brother. He lived 6 hours away from me, so I didn't get to see him very often. He only had a one-bedroom apartment, which meant I had to stay elsewhere when I visited. The house I rented was very close to my brother's apartment. It was the same price as nearby hotels, so it was an easy choice to go for the house. I got into town early in the morning, met up with my brother for lunch, and then got some groceries, and was back at the rental around 5 o'clock. The place didn't have a lot to offer other than a couch, TV, and bed, but for the price, I wasn't expecting much. I stayed up until 9, and they got into bed. It had been a long day, so I was looking forward to getting a good amount of shut-eye. I laid in bed awake for longer than I wanted, finally falling asleep after an hour. When my eyes opened, the room was in full darkness, and I could sense it was the middle of the night. Before I could check the time, I heard something outside the door, footsteps slowly walking down the hallway, and then a door closing softly, followed by silence. My whole body froze as I lay in bed, staring through the dark room. After a minute passed with no more sounds, I got up and looked into the hallway. At the far end, I could see the front door, which I knew was the door I heard close. I didn't know if they were still in the house, or if they had left. I quietly walked through the other rooms, but didn't see anyone. The only sign of someone having been there was the front door being unlocked. I didn't see any footprints or notice anything missing. After checking the locks on all the doors, I called 911. They came fairly quickly but didn't do much. They said to make sure that all the doors were locked and to contact the owner. Aside from their advice, they provided no intent to figure it out. I stayed up that night, unable to sleep. In the morning, I called the owner of the rental and discussed what had happened. I went to see my brother, while the owner let me know that he had changed the PIN code on the door, which made me feel a lot better. I was out until late that day, getting dinner and drinks with my brother, and was dropped off at the rental sometime between 8 and 9. I went to the couch and sat down, feeling sleepy but also nervous about the situation. Every time my eyes were about to close, my head would fill with fear of the intruder coming back. Knowing I needed to sleep that night, since I didn't get any sleep the night before, I decided to go through the house again and check the rooms in hopes of easing my mind. I walked around the living room and kitchen, then went down the hallway to the bedroom. I opened the closet and checked the attached bathroom. Just before I walked out, I heard footsteps running through the hallway towards the bedroom I was in. I swung around the corner and caught only a glimpse of a large man as he slammed the bedroom door shut. Then I heard his footsteps departing, going toward the living room. I stood in place and listened. He moved all around the living room and kitchen, staying inside the house for probably 2 minutes, before I heard the front door open and close behind him. The police came quickly after I called again, and this time the homeowner came by as well. The living room and kitchen looked like they had been ransacked. Furniture was scattered all over, and the cabinets were open with the contents tossed on the floor. After a closer look, the owner didn't see anything missing. It seemed like the man was looking for something very specific. I left the rental and got a hotel after that. Within a few days, I was never updated about anything. I assumed the intruder was never found, but the situation left me with a lot of questions. Something that really gets to me is that I checked the entire house that one night. So where was he hiding? How long had he been in the house with me? Was he watching me? And what would have happened if I had fallen asleep on the couch?
Thanks for listening. If you want to help build the True Chiller community, like, subscribe, and share.